The morning of the wedding, the sun was so bright it felt like a lie. I spent hours getting ready, choosing this dress, a soft lavender, something I thought looked gentle, non-threatening. I wanted to blend into the background of his happiness, a supportive figure, not a centerpiece. The whole drive to the venue, my hands wouldn't stop twisting in my lap. I kept smoothing the fabric over my knees, trying to press the anxiety away. This was supposed to be a happy day, my only son's wedding day. And all I could feel was this cold knot of dread in my stomach, this fear that I was an intruder at my own family's celebration. The ceremony was beautiful, of course. She looked like something from a magazine. Her dress was exquisite, her hair perfect, but when she walked down the aisle, she didn't look at me. Her eyes were fixed on my son, and I was grateful for that, for his smile, but I saw the way her jaw was set just a little too tight. The way her smile, while stunning, didn't quite reach her eyes when she glanced towards our side of the family. It was in the reception hall, amidst the floral arrangements and the soft glow of string lights, that the air felt truly heavy. You could almost touch the tension, a thin, brittle layer of ice over all the laughter and conversation. I tried to catch her eye, to offer a small, encouraging smile, but she was always looking just past me, her attention skittering away like a stone across water. Every interaction, whatever had flashed through my mind, the suggestions I'd made about the engagement party that were gently dismissed, the questions about their future plans that were met with vague, polite answers. I told myself it was just wedding day nerves, that I was imagining the distance. I prayed silently, desperately, that today would be the day the wall between us finally crumbled. Sitting at the head table was an honor that felt like a punishment. I was perched right there in the spotlight next to my new daughter-in-law. The toast was my idea. I'd practiced it for weeks. I wanted it to be perfect, a bridge. I stood up, the microphone cool and slick in my trembling hand. The clinking of glasses faded away, and all those faces turned towards me. I could see my son beaming, so full of love and hope. I took a shallow breath. I started to speak, my voice sounding thin and reedy. In the large room, I talked about how proud I was of the man had become. I talked about the joy of gaining a daughter. I looked directly at her then, my words meant for her, a genuine offering. And to my beautiful new daughter, I said, my voice cracking with emotion, welcome to our family. We are so lucky to have you. That's when it happened. She didn't stand up. She didn't raise her voice. She just turned her head slightly towards me, the picture of grace in her white gown, and her smile never wavered. But her eyes were like chips of ice, in a voice so quiet, so perfectly calibrated to be heard only by me. And perhaps my son sitting between us. She said it, you shouldn't have come. The words were so soft, yet they hit me with the force of a physical blow. And then I saw my son. He heard her, and he didn't flinch. He didn't look shocked. He just gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, an agreement, a confirmation. In that instant, the world didn't just stop, it shattered. The vibrant colors of the room bleached away into a dull gray. The sounds of the reception, music, the laughter, the chatter, all melted together into a meaningless roaring buzz in my ears. The weight of the microphone in my hand felt immense, an anchor pulling me down. I could feel the heat of 100 eyes on me, or were they? Maybe no one else had heard. Maybe I was trapped in this silent, horrifying movie that only the three of us were starring in. I managed to mumble the rest of my toast, the words tasting like ash, and set down. The applause that followed sounded distant, mocking. I don't know how long I sat there, a statue with a painted-on smile. The rest of the meal was a blur of clinking silverware and forced conversation I didn't hear the moment the music started for the first dance. I saw my chance. I muttered something about needing the ladies' room and slipped away from the table. I didn't go to the restroom. I found a dimly lit alcove near the kitchen entrance, a small space hidden by a large potted fern. The air smelled of garlic and dish soap, a stark, honest smell compared to the cloying sweetness of the perfume and flowers in the main hall. I leaned against the cool wall, pressing my forehead to the plaster, and finally let the tears come. They were silent, hot tears of utter humiliation. My mind was a storm of memories, each one rising up to accuse me. The time ID suggested a different color for her bridesmaids' dresses, thinking I was being helpful. The time ID asked too many times if they were sure about moving so far away. I replayed every conversation, searching for the moment I became the villain. Was I too clingy, too critical? Did I love my son too much in a way that felt suffocating to her? I thought I was being a good mother, involved, caring, but through her eyes I saw a different story. I saw a meddling, overbearing woman who couldn't let go. A wave of self-righteous anger washed over me. How dare she, on today of all days, in front of everyone? This was my son's day too, but the anger was hollow, and it collapsed almost immediately under the weight of a deeper, more painful truth. She felt like I didn't respect her. She felt like I was an obstacle to their new life. And the most devastating part was that my son, my own child, agreed with her. He had chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. The pain of that was a physical ache, a crack spreading right through the center of my heart. I knew I couldn't go back to that table. I couldn't pretend to dance, to smile, to make small talk with relatives. My presence was a poison. She had made that abundantly clear. The greatest act of love I could show my son now was to disappear. I found my clutch purse, my fingers fumbling with the clasp. I would take a cab home. I walked back towards the main hall, keeping to the shadows at the edge of the room. The party was in full swing now. People were laughing, dancing, completely unaware of the little drama that had just obliterated a mother's heart. I scanned the dance floor and found them. They were dancing, her head resting on his shoulder, his hand resting on the small of her back. They looked peaceful, whole, a perfect self-contained unit. And in that moment, despite the tearing pain, I felt a flicker of something else, a desperate, hopeless hope for his happiness. If my absence was the price for his peace, then I would pay it. I stood there for a long minute, just watching him, memorizing the sight of him so happy. I sent a silent prayer out into the universe, a wish that his life with her would be everything he dreamed of, that he would never know this kind of heartache. And then I made a resolution, a painful, necessary vow. I would step back. I would give them all the space in the world. I would swallow my pride, my hurt, my own desire to be a part of their lives. I would wait not for an apology, but for an invitation, if it ever came. The hope for that future reconciliation was a tiny, fragile seed planted in the barren soil of that night. It felt like it might never grow, but I had to nurture it. It was all I had left. I turned and walked out of the reception hall, the music and laughter fading behind me like a dream. I was waking up from the cool night air hit my face, and I took a deep, shuddering breath. The celebration continued without me, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that nobody would even notice I was gone. The entire year of planning felt like a slow, steady siege. Every conversation, every text message, every helpful suggestion was another brick in a wall. I never asked for. You made it very clear from the beginning that my vision for the day was just a suggestion, a Rough draft for your own masterpiece. I wanted a small, intimate ceremony in the garden by the old oak tree. You immediately started sending me links to grand ballrooms and country clubs. When I said we were thinking of a buffet, you spent a full hour on the phone listing the superior merits of a plated dinner service. You called my choice of colors the deep burgundy and soft ivory a bit drab for a summer wedding, and wondered aloud if something brighter would be more cheerful. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. You'd ask for my opinion, and then before I could even finish my sentence, you'd be explaining why your way was simply more practical, more elegant, more traditional. It was never a shout, never a direct command. It was a constant, quiet hum of correction, a sigh. When I showed you the simple minimalist invitations, a pointed comment about how real weddings have a 5-tier cake, not the single tier with a cascade of fresh berries that I'd dreamed of, you'd talk over me to the florist, redirecting the order to include the peonies you loved, even though I had my heart set on garden roses. I started to feel like a ghost in my own wedding. My preferences were mere whispers, easily drowned out by the sheer force of your certainty. It wasn't just about the flowers or the cake, it was the feeling that you saw my marriage, my partnership, as something you had a right to design. I felt like an outsider trying to get a word in edgewise about the event that was supposed to celebrate the union I was building with your son. The wedding day itself was supposed to be a ceasefire. I woke up that morning thinking it's done, the plans are set, all she can do now is show up and be a guest. I was so naive. The first thing you did when you arrived at the venue hours early was to corner the coordinator. I saw you from the window of the bridal suite, pointing aggressively at the seating chart, demanding that your cousin Beatrice be moved from table 8 to table 2 right next to the head table. You said it was a matter of family respect, it was a matter of control. Then you went to the caterer and insisted they add a specific brand of sparkling water to the bar, the one you preferred, because what we had chosen was, and I heard you say this to common, the pressure was building inside me all morning. A tightness in my chest that made it hard to breathe. My own mother was trying to keep me calm, stroking my hair, telling me to just let it go for today. But I couldn't. This was the day, this was the line. If I didn't draw it now, in this moment, on this sacred ground, then when we bought a house, when we had children, would you be there rearranging the nursery furniture and questioning our choice of pediatrician? This confrontation wasn't born out of malice, it was an act of sheer self-preservation. I felt like if I didn't speak, I would simply cease to exist as an individual, as a wife, as an equal partner. I would be absorbed into your version of our life. So I walked out of that room. I walked right up to you, my dress swishing around my ankles, my heart hammering against my ribs. You were mid-sentence, instructing a poor groomsman on how to properly straighten aisle runner. You turned to me with a bright performative smile, ready to offer another unsolicited tip, and I just said it. My voice was quiet, but it was steady. I said, you shouldn't have come. The smile didn't just leave your face, it shattered. You looked stunned, then hurt, then angry. You started to say something about how much you'd done, how much you'd contributed. But the most important thing that happened in that moment wasn't what I said to you, it was what happened beside me. I felt a hand slip into mine. It was your son, my husband. He had seen the whole thing from across the room. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look at me with question or panic. He just came and stood by my side, his grip firm and sure. He looked at you, his own mother, and he said, "She's right, Mom, you need to stop. This is our day." That unity, that silent communication that passed between us in a single look was everything. It was the entire point of the wedding. It was the testament I needed in that moment. We weren't just two people in love, we were a single front, a new family. Unique, drawing a boundary round ourselves. I know how it must have looked to you, and to anyone else who saw it must have seemed cruel, harsh, a Bridezilla banishing her mother-in-law on her wedding day. But I need you to understand that it wasn't cruelty. It was the bravest, strongest act I have ever performed. It was the moment I stopped being just the girlfriend, the fiancée, the daughter-in-law, and started being the wife. I was fighting for my marriage before it had even officially begun. I was prioritizing the man standing next to me over the woman standing in front of me, and he was doing the same for me. That statement, "You shouldn't have come," was intentional. It wasn't a spontaneous burst of anger. It was a carefully laid cornerstone for the foundation of our life together. I was defining the terms of our relationship right there, and then I was saying that your presence in our lives is a privilege, not a right. It is contingent on respect. I know it was painful. I didn't want it to be a scene, but sometimes a clean break, a sharp line is kinder than a lifetime of slow resentment and simmering anger. It clears the air. It establishes a new reality. My hope, my genuine hope, is that this painful moment will eventually lead to something healthier, that after the shock wears off you might understand that my love for your son is so fierce that I will protect our space, our peace, our union from anyone who threatens it, even unintentionally. This wasn't about pushing you away forever. It was about asking you to step back onto the porch, so to speak, instead of always standing in our doorway. It was about creating a dynamic where we can have a relationship built on mutual respect, where you offer advice when it's asked for and support us in our choices even when they differ from your own. If there's a message in this for anyone else listening, for anyone else dealing with a family that doesn't know where to stop, it's this: your new family, the one you are creating with your partner, must come first. It is not disloyal to set boundaries. It is essential. It is the very work of building a life together. The moment you say "I do," your primary allegiance shifts. It is a difficult, painful transition sometimes, and it requires a strength you might not know you have. But standing up with your partner beside you and defining the space that is yours and yours alone is the most important wedding planning you will ever do. It sets the tone for everything that follows, and on that day, amidst the flowers and the music and the love that was the most sacred vow we made the morning of the wedding, the sun was too bright. It streamed into the hotel suite, highlighting every speck of dust in the air, making everything feel too sharp to expose. My tuxedo was hanging on the closet door, a silhouette of the man I was supposed to become in just a few hours, but right then I felt like a little boy trying on his father's shoes. I could hear them from opposite ends of the suite. My mom was in the sitting area, meticulously arranging the boutonnieres, her fingers precise and slightly trembling every so often. She'd sigh, a soft, wounded sound meant to be heard. Sarah, my bride, was in the bedroom with her bridesmaids, their laughter a forced, high-pitched cascade that would suddenly cut off into an uneasy silence. The air wasn't just filled with excitement, it was thick with a history of quiet judgments and unspoken grievances. I had hoped the sheer magnitude of the day would wash all that away, that the joy would be too powerful for their old arguments to survive, but I could feel it, a low hum of tension beneath The surface like a fault line waiting for the right pressure to split open. My role that morning was a diplomat in a war zone of lace and flowers. I'd go to Sarah, wrap my arms around her from behind while she looked in the mirror, and whisper how beautiful she was, how lucky I was. She'd lean back into me for a second, a moment of real peace, but then her body would tense. Again, is your mother still fussing with the seating chart? I told her it was finalized. I'd kiss her temple and say it was just mom being mom, that she wanted everything to be perfect. Then I'd walk over to my mother, who would immediately start straightening my already straight shirt collar. She seems very stressed, dear. A bride should be radiant, not agitated. And I'd smile, a tight, painful smile, and tell her Sarah was just overwhelmed with happiness. I was a translator between two languages of love, and I was mistranslating on purpose, trying to build a bridge out of tissue paper. Every placating word felt like a betrayal to someone. The gnawing fear in my gut told me this fragile truce was a temporary illusion. I was just hoping we could get through the ceremony before it collapsed, and for a while it held. The ceremony itself was a beautiful blur. Seeing Sarah walk down the aisle wiped everything else away. Her eyes were locked on mine, and in that moment there was no one else in the world. We said our vows, our voices steady, promising to choose each other every day. I meant every word with every fiber of my being. But as we walked back up the aisle, husband and wife, my eyes found my mother's. In the front row, her smile was proud, but her eyes were red-rimmed. She was already feeling me slip away. The reception started with a wave of good feeling. The toasts were funny, the food was great, the band started playing. I thought we'd made it. I let myself believe the worst was over. The moment of crisis happened near the end of the night. I was getting us drinks at the bar when I heard it, Sarah's voice, sharp and clear, cutting through the music and laughter. I turned and saw them standing by the wedding cake, what was left of it. My mother had her hand on Sarah's arm, a gesture that was probably meant to be comforting, but Sarah's posture was rigid. I couldn't hear the first part, just my mother's soothing, condescending tone, the one she uses when she's trying to manage a situation. Then Sarah's reply, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. I don't need you to tell me how to handle my own husband, Margaret. This is our day, not yours. You need to let go. The words hung in the air. My mother's face crumpled. It wasn't just a look of hurt, it was a look of profound public humiliation. Her hand flew to her chest as if she'd been physically struck. All the color drained from her face, and her eyes, wide with shock, instantly filled with tears. She looked at me across the dance floor, a silent plea for defense. And in that split second, a lifetime of instincts fought for control. The instinct to comfort my mom, to shield her from pain, was a physical pull, but a stronger, deeper instinct took over. I saw my wife standing her ground, her jaw set, her eyes blazing with a truth she'd held back for years. She wasn't just being harsh, she was drawing a boundary, a line that should have been drawn long ago. I walked towards them. It felt like walking against a strong current. Every eye at the nearby tables was on me. I didn't look at my mother. I went straight to Sarah and put my arm round her waist, pulling her close to my side. I felt her tremble against me. I looked at my mother, whose expression had shifted from hurt to a kind of horrified understanding. Mom, I said, my voice sounding strangely calm, Sarah's right. This is our day. Please. The words were simple, but their meaning was monumental. I had chosen, I had solidified our new Family unit right there in front of everyone. The duty to my wife, the promise I had made just hours earlier overpowered the guilt that was already coiling in my stomach like a snake. I watched as my mother's face completely closed off, the tears dried up, replaced by a cold, distant mask. She nodded once, a tiny mechanical movement, and without another word she turned and walked away towards the bathroom. The simultaneous war of guilt and duty was a deafening roar inside my head. I had done the right thing for my marriage, but the sight of my mother's retreating back felt like a personal failure of a different kind. The rest of the reception was a sham. The music kept playing, people kept dancing, but the joy had been sucked out of the room for me. Every laugh sounded hollow. I was performing the role of the happy groom, but my mind was elsewhere. Sarah stayed by my side, her grip on my hand tight, almost desperate. She knew what that cost me. She'd whisper thank you, and I'd squeeze her hand back, but the words felt heavy. I was grateful for her, committed to her, but I was also mourning something. The band played our song and we danced, but my eyes scanned the crowd looking for my mom. She never came back to the dance floor. Later, after we'd said our goodbyes to the last guests, I found her sitting alone at a table in the now empty ballroom. The staff was already clearing glasses and dismantling the centerpieces. She was just staring at her hands folded in her lap. I pulled out a chair and sat next to her. The silence between us was a vast, uncomfortable space. I started the painful conversation, my voice low. Mom, I'm sorry. You were upset. She didn't look at me. Upset is a small word for what that was, she said quietly. To be publicly chastised by my new daughter-in-law on my son's wedding day, and then for you to take her side. I tried to explain Sarah's perspective, how she felt micromanaged, how she felt like Mom was never going to see her as an equal partner in my life. I talked about our need for space, to build our own lives, our own traditions. It all sounded like a weak excuse even to my own ears. My mother finally looked at me, and her eyes were full of a deep, weary sadness. I have spent my entire life building a life for you. Every decision, every sacrifice was for you. And now on the day I'm supposed to gain a daughter, it feels like I'm losing my son. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. This was the core of it. This was the struggle I had to reconcile. I loved my mother. I appreciated everything she had done for me, but my commitment to my marriage was a different kind of love. A chosen love that had to take priority now. Trying to explain that to her felt like trying to describe color to someone who had been blind their whole life. The wedding festivities were over, and they were forever shadowed by that confrontation. Our wedding album would have a bitter sweetness to it, a memory of the day we became a family, and the day I broke my mother's heart. In the weeks and months that followed, I had to fully accept my new role. I was a husband first, and a son second. It was a difficult, painful prioritization. There were phone calls that went unanswered because Sarah and I were having a date night. There were holiday plans we made for just the two of us, a new tradition that explicitly did not include my mother's input. Each decision felt like a small betrayal, but I knew it was necessary. My primary loyalty had to be to the family I was building, not just the family I came from. My determination to build a strong, united marriage with Sarah was my compass. Every time I felt that pull of guilt, I would look at my wife, at the life we were creating together in our new home, and I knew I was on the right path, even if it was a painful one. I never closed the door on my mother. Though I left it open hoping for future healing, I called her every Sunday just to talk. The conversations were stilted at first, polite and surface level. She'd ask about work, I'd ask about her garden. We were carefully avoiding the chasm that had opened between us, but slowly over time, the calls got a little longer, a little more comfortable. She started asking about Sarah, not as a point of conflict, but just as a person in my life. How is Sarah's project at work going? It was a small question, but it was a start. I knew the road to mending our relationship would be long, and it would require a new understanding from all of us. It couldn't be the way it was before. It had to be something new, something that respected the boundaries of my marriage. Now, when I reflect on it all, I see the complex nature of love and loyalty. A family transition isn't a clean handoff. It's messy and emotional. It's about learning that loving your parents doesn't mean sacrificing your partnership. It's about understanding that my mother's love, while immense, had to learn its new place, and my love for Sarah had to be brave enough to sometimes cause pain in order to build a lasting foundation. The wedding day clash wasn't the end of anything. It was a brutal, necessary beginning. It was the moment I stopped being just a son and started being a husband, and while the memory of my mother's face that night still brings a pang of guilt, I know that my choice that day was the first and most important commitment I made to my wife. It set the tone for our marriage. It taught us that we are a team, that we face everything together, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, and that, I've come to understand, is the very heart of the promise we made. The church was beautiful, of course, all white stone, stained glass that threw little colored diamonds of light onto the floor. The flowers were incredible, huge arrangements of white roses and eucalyptus that smelled sweet and clean. You could tell no expense had been spared. The bride, Sarah, looked like something out of a magazine, and Mark, the groom, he couldn't stop smiling at her. Was the kind of wedding you see in movies. For a little while it was easy to believe in the perfect picture, but you start to notice things. When you're just a guest sitting off to the side, you have time to watch. My table was near the back, which gave me a pretty good view of the head table. That's where I first saw the cracks. Mark's mother, Eleanor, she was sitting right there in the center next to the happy couple. She was wearing a deep navy blue dress, very elegant, very expensive, and she was smiling, but it was the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach days. It was a performance, a very good one, but a performance nonetheless. During the toasts, when the best man was telling a funny story about Mark in college, everyone was laughing, but Eleanor's laugh was a beat too late, a touch too loud. Her eyes kept flicking over to Sarah, the bride, and then away just for a second. It was a tiny thing, almost nothing, and Sarah, for her part, seemed to be deliberately not looking at her. She was focused on her new husband, her hand on his arm, but there was a tightness in her jaw, a little tension. I remember thinking it was just brooding nerves, maybe some typical mother-in-law, daughter-in-law stuff, you know, the usual. I heard a few whispers at my table. A woman next to me, a friend of the bride's family, leaned over and said, "She's been quiet today, hasn't she, Eleanor?" And another person nodded. She wanted a much bigger wedding. I heard this was all Sarah's family's doing. It was just gossip, the kind that floats around any big event. I didn't think much of it. It all seemed like background noise against the celebration. The dinner was winding down. The band was taking a break, and the soft murmur of 100 conversations filled the room. People were full, happy, a little drowsy from the wine. That's when it happened. There was no warning. The sound just cut through the hum, clear and sharp as broken glass. It was Sarah's voice. She was turned in her chair facing Eleanor directly. She wasn't shouting, but her voice carried. It was firm, and it was cold. The words were simple, but they landed with the force of a physical blow. You have spent every moment of this day trying to undermine me, and I am done pretending you're a gracious mother-in-law. The silence didn't happen all at once. It was like a wave. It started at the tables closest to the head table. The conversations just died mid-sentence. You could see people freeze, a fork halfway to their mouth. Then the silence spread table by table as people realized something was terribly wrong. It was the quietest I have ever heard. A room full of 200 people. You could hear the clink of a glass from the kitchen, the look on Eleanor's face. I will never forget it. It was pure, unadulterated shock. The polite mask she'd been wearing all day just shattered. Her mouth was slightly open. Her eyes were wide, staring at Sarah as if she'd been slapped. And maybe she had been in a way. Mark, the groom, had his head bowed. He looked pain defeated. He didn't look at his wife or his mother. He just stared at the tablecloth. But Sarah, she was unwavering. Her face was pale, but her gaze was steady. There was no anger in her expression, not really. It was more like a final, weary resignation. She wasn't asking a question. She was making a statement. Then, as quickly as it started, it was over. Eleanor stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. She didn't say a word. She just turned and walked away from the table, her head held high, but you could see the tremor in her hands. She walked straight out of the main reception hall and into the lobby. The door swung shut behind her. For a moment nobody moved. Then the room erupted, not in noise but in a frantic hush, whispering. It was like a swarm of bees had descended. You could feel the gossip spreading table to table. People were leaning in their hands, covering their mouths, their eyes wide with a kind of horrified excitement. Did you hear that? What did she say? What on earth prompted that? The atmosphere in the room shifted completely. The celebration was gone. The band came back and started to play a soft jazz number, but it sounded hollow, awkward. Nobody was dancing. Everyone was too busy talking, speculating, watching. You could see people looking at the head table, at Sarah and Mark. Sarah was still sitting perfectly straight, but Mark had gotten up and followed his mother out. The schedule was broken. The cake cutting was delayed. The whole rhythm of the evening had been disrupted. I saw a group of aunts huddled together near the dessert table, their heads bent close. I caught snippets. Always been difficult. Never thought Sarah would have the nerve. Poor Mark stuck in the middle. Theories were being spun out of thin air. Everyone had a piece of the puzzle, or thought they did. Someone mentioned a disagreement over the guest list. Someone else whispered about a comment Eleanor had made about the wedding dress being too simple. The private history of this family was being written and rewritten right there in public by a crowd of amateur historians. After about 10 minutes, Mark came back in alone. He went straight to Sarah, spoke to her quietly, and then they both left the main room together. The party was still technically going on, but the heart had gone out of it. People started leaving earlier than they probably would have. The goodbyes were quick, a little awkward. There were a lot of forced smiles. I found myself just sitting there watching it all unfold. It was like watching a play where the fourth wall had been completely broken. This wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was a crime scene, And we were all accidental witnesses. I thought about my own family, the arguments we've had, the tensions that simmer beneath the surface during holidays. We've just been lucky, I suppose, that they've never boiled over in a room full of people. That's the thing about a wedding or any big public event. It's a stage. Everyone is playing a part. The happy couple, the proud parents, the joyful guests. We all agree to perform these roles for the day. But sometimes the real life, the messy, complicated, painful real life refuses to stay backstage. It demands a spotlight of its own. What was the lesson in all that? It wasn't really about wedding etiquette. It was a lesson about the fragility of the facades we build. A family is a complex thing, a web of old hurts and unspoken agreements and love that sometimes gets twisted into something else. A day that's meant to be a celebration of a new beginning can suddenly become the setting for the culmination of years of quiet resentment. I thought about Eleanor sitting somewhere alone, her evening ruined. I thought about Sarah, who must have been pushed to her absolute limit to say something like that in front of everyone. And I thought about Mark, who probably knew this was coming one way or another. There are no real winners in a moment like that, just a lot of collateral damage. The real conflict, the one that started long before the wedding day, should have been handled somewhere private long ago, but it wasn't. And because it wasn't, it chose the most public possible moment to announce itself. As I drove home, the image that stayed with me wasn't the beautiful church or the flowers. It was the look on Sarah's face right after she spoke. It was the look of someone who had finally told truth that had been poisoning her for a long time. It was terrible, and it was public, and it was messy, but in a strange way it was also honest. The perfect wedding was an illusion. What was left after the facade crumbled was just the complicated truth of a family, and I was just a guest who had a front row seat to the moment it all fell apart. The wedding day is supposed to be a beginning, a celebration of a new family unit forming. But sometimes it becomes the stage for an ending, the final act in a long-running quiet drama. When your mother-in-law said those words to you, "You shouldn't have come," it wasn't a spontaneous outburst. It was the eruption of a pressure that had been building for years, maybe decades. To understand that moment, we have to look at the psychology behind it, the patterns that led to that point of rupture. Let's start with the foundation, the brooding dynamic. This was a brewing storm long before the invitations were ever sent. From a psychological standpoint, we can look at the mother-in-law's behavior through a few potential lenses. One is enmeshment. This is when the boundaries between a parent and a child become blurred, where the parent's identity is too tightly wrapped up in the child's life. Her son's wedding isn't just his celebration. It feels like a loss of her primary role. It's a threat to that enmeshed identity. Every decision about the wedding guest list, the flowers, the seating chart might feel like a personal rejection if it doesn't align with her vision. Her sense of self is tied to his choices. This can tie into a deep-seated fear of abandonment. A son getting married is a natural progression, but if a parent has unresolved anxieties, it can feel like being left behind. The need to control the event or to insert herself in ways that feel inappropriate can be a manifestation of that fear. It's an attempt to maintain a connection that she perceives is slipping away. Her comment, "You shouldn't have come," is perhaps the ultimate expression of that fear. Realize that it pushes you away before she can feel pushed away herself. It's a preemptive strike born of insecurity. Now, from your perspective, the daughter-in-law, the Psychology is about the opposite force establishing autonomy. A wedding is one of the most significant ways a new couple declares their independence. It's about boundary formation. Your actions, your decisions about your own wedding are a statement. You are carving out your own territory, both literally and emotionally. When a mother-in-law resists those boundaries, it forces a more rigid, more defensive stance. What might have been a gentle suggestion becomes a firm rule. The conflict escalates because the need for autonomy becomes paramount for the health of your new marriage. You aren't just choosing a centerpiece, you are choosing your own life. The wedding itself acts as a high-stakes trigger. It's a public event laden with symbolism for the mother-in-law. It can feel like a final judgment on her parenting, a showcase of her being replaced for you. It's the foundation of your future with so much emotional weight. Any slight, any perceived interference is magnified 100 times over. Latent conflicts that could be brushed aside during a Sunday dinner suddenly become monumental. The pressure cooker was always there. The wedding just turned up the heat until it had to blow. Then comes the confrontation itself. We have to see the verbal attack not as the problem, but as a symptom of a complete communication breakdown. The resentment had been building, but the channels for discussing it were likely closed or non-existent. Perhaps every previous attempt to address issues was met with defensiveness, dismissal, or guilt. So the feelings fester. They don't disappear. They get packed down tighter and tighter until they find the smallest crack to escape from, and they escape not as a calm discussion, but as a torrent. The words are harsh because they carry the weight of every unsaid thing that came before. The choice of a public setting for this confrontation is also psychologically significant. Public humiliation has a specific purpose. It's not just about expressing anger. It's about maximizing the impact. It's a way of ensuring the message is heard and cannot be easily ignored or downplayed. Later, it forces the issue into the open in a way that a private conversation might not. For the mother-in-law, the public nature of the moment was likely meant to shame her, to show her that her behavior has consequences that are visible to everyone. It was a boundary enforced not with a whisper, but with a shout. And then there was your wife's agreement. Her simple, firm support of your statement was perhaps the most powerful part of the entire exchange psychologically. This is a profound reinforcement of a new family system. For years, the primary alliance was between mother and son. Your statement and your wife's immediate backing created a new unbreakable alliance. It was a declaration that the old dynamic is over. The husband-wife unit is now the central pillar. This is painful for a parent to witness, but it is also necessary and healthy for the marriage. It draws a line in the sand that says we are a team. Now your influence stops here. Her agreement was the seal on that new contract. This brings us to the triangulation of the son, your husband. In the years leading up to this, he was likely the triangulated party. This is a psychological term for when two people in conflict use a third person as a go-between or a way to manage their own anxiety. His mother would express her displeasure to him about you. You might have expressed your frustration to him about her. He was stuck in the middle, forced to be a messenger, a peacemaker, or a referee. This is an incredibly stressful position. It forces a person to choose between two people they love, often leading to feelings of guilt and divided loyalty. The pressure of being forced to choose sides is immense. In the past, he may have tried to placate both sides, which only prolongs the conflict, but the wedding Confrontation forced. His hand, his choice to stand with you, to not intervene and defend his mother was a pivotal moment. The long-term effects of that choice are significant. It solidifies the new family structure. But it also likely creates a rift with his mother. It's a painful rebalancing of family roles. The son is no longer just a son, he is a husband first. This confrontation, as brutal as it was, made that shift explicit and undeniable. It was the painful but necessary process of him detaching from the old enmeshed system and fully committing to the new one. So where does a family go from here? What are the pathways to healing after such a dramatic rupture? From a therapeutic perspective, healing cannot begin until the pain is acknowledged. This isn't about assigning blame, but about validating feelings. Your mother-in-law needs to feel that her sense of loss is heard, even if her methods of expressing it were destructive. You need to feel that your right to autonomy and respect is recognized. This requires a willingness from all parties to move from a position of defensiveness to one of vulnerability. The next crucial step is the establishment of clear, firm, and consistent boundaries. This is not about punishment, it's about safety. For a relationship to have any chance of recovering, everyone needs to know the rules of engagement, what topics are off limits, what behaviors are unacceptable. What is the consequence if a boundary is crossed? These boundaries protect the new marital unit and also, paradoxically, create a space where a healthier, more distant relationship with the extended family might eventually be possible. It defines what the relationship can be by clearly stating what it cannot be. Rebuilding trust is the slowest part. It happens in small, consistent actions over time. It's the mother-in-law respecting a decision without complaint. It's the son and daughter-in-law offering a small olive branch, like sharing a photo of a new pet. It's about demonstrating through action that the old patterns are changing. This might require family therapy to facilitate providing a neutral space with a guide to navigate these treacherous waters. It's important to consider that such a dramatic rupture, while painful, can have positive outcomes. It forces issues to the surface that have been festering in the dark for too long. It shatters the illusion that everything is fine now. Everyone knows it is not fine, and that honesty, as brutal as it is the only solid ground on which to build anything new. The alternative is a lifetime of quiet resentment and superficial interactions, which is no foundation for a family. For other families, the lesson is in prevention. The key is proactive and honest communication. It's addressing small issues as they rise, not waiting for them to become big ones. It's couples presenting a united front to their families from the very beginning, making it clear that their primary loyalty is to each other. It's parents working to build their own identities and support systems separate from their children, so that a wedding feels like a celebration, not a loss. It's about having the difficult conversations early, before the pressure builds to an explosive level. The moment she said "you shouldn't have come" was the culmination of a long psychological journey. It was a tragedy, but also a catalyst. It ended one chapter of family life, and as painful as it is, it has the potential to begin a new, healthier one. The path forward is narrow and difficult, requiring immense courage from everyone involved, but the alternativito continue. The silent wear is a price too high for any family to pay. The rupture, in its own harsh way, contains the seed of a possible healing. The silence at our table was a physical thing. It was heavy like a thick blanket smothering all the happy noise from the other tables, the clinking glasses, the laughter. It all just faded into a dull hum. All I could hear was the echo of my own voice, those 5 words hanging in the air between us: "You shouldn't have come." And then her nod. It was a small, sharp movement. An agreement, a confirmation of a truth we had both been avoiding for years. Her face was pale, her lips a tight, thin line. She didn't look angry anymore, she just looked defeated. And in that moment, watching her absorb the blow, I felt the floor drop out from under me. How did we get here? How did a day that was supposed to be about family and celebration become the final stage for a war we'd been fighting in quiet, secret skirmishes for so long? It started, I suppose, the first day I met her. David brought her home for a Sunday dinner. She was clutching a bouquet of flowers so tightly the stems were practically bending. She was nervous. I remember thinking she seemed so young, so fragile. I wanted to put her at ease, so I tried to give her advice. I said, "David has always been particular about how his shirts are folded. He likes the crease." Just so I meant it as a kindness, a little insider information to help her navigate my son's quirks. But I saw the way her smile tightened. She took it as criticism, as if I was implying she wouldn't know how to care for him. That was the first crack, a hairline fracture in what should have been a fresh start. I didn't see it then. I just saw a girl who was too sensitive. There were other moments like that, small things, but they piled up. She'd talk about her job, something exciting she was working on, and I'd steer the conversation back to David. He got a promotion. You know, his boss says he's the hardest worker in the department. I was just a proud mother bragging about her son. But every time I did it, I could feel her pulling away a little more. She started wearing different clothes when she came over, more sophisticated, more expensive, like she was trying to prove something. I'd comment on a nice blouse, and she'd say it's for work, image is important, and I'd feel this strange chill, like she was building a wall between her world and ours. David would just sit there quiet, trying to keep the peace. Had changed the subject to something safe like the weather or a new movie. I thought he was being diplomatic. I didn't realize he was just postponing the inevitable. Then they got engaged. The ring was beautiful, but it wasn't what I would have chosen. It was modern, all sharp angles and unusual settings. I said it looked very distinctive. She heard an insult. The wedding planning was where the real battle lines were drawn. It was a constant low-grade war fought over linen samples and seating charts. She wanted a small, intimate wedding at a modern art gallery. I envisioned our family church filled with all our relatives and friends. It's what we've always done. I told David, your father and I were married there. Your grandparents were married there. I wasn't trying to be difficult. I was trying to give him his heritage, but she dug her heels in. The gallery was non-negotiable. We argued about the guest list. I had a list of cousins and old family friends, people who had watched David grow up. She called it a bloated list of strangers. It's our day, she'd say, her voice tight. It should be about us, and I'd think, but we are his family, don't we count? David was caught in the middle. He'd have these long hushed conversations with her in the other room, and then he'd come back and try to negotiate with me. Mom, maybe we can just invite the immediate family on your side. It felt like a betrayal, like he was choosing her over me. The dress was the worst. She took me shopping with her mother. It was supposed to be a bonding experience. She tried on a sleek, simple gown. It was lovely, But it wasn't a wedding dress, not to me. I pointed to a traditional lace gown with a long train. Now that I said, "That is a bride," her face fell. Her mother shot me a look that could freeze water. My future daughter-in-law just said, "It's not really my style," in a voice so flat and final it left no room for discussion. I bought the lace gown anyway. I thought it was a generous gesture. When I presented it to her, her expression was one of pure horror. She handed it back to me and said, "I appreciate the thought, but I already have my dress." That was the moment I think I truly understood that I was losing him, that I was being relegated to a guest in his new life. The week of the wedding was a special kind of torture. The tension was so thick you could taste it. She had everything planned down to the minute. A military operation of celebration. I kept making suggestions. What about these centerpieces? What about serving this cake? Every idea was met with a polite firm "We've already decided." I felt invisible, superfluous. The day before the wedding there was an incident. She was setting up the guest book table at the gallery. She had a very specific vision with photos of her and David, and a beautiful leather-bound book. I saw an old ornate silver frame my mother had given me. I thought it would be perfect for one of the photos, a piece of family history, so I brought it and placed it on the table. She walked in and stopped dead. Her eyes went from the frame to me. "What is that?" she asked. I told her it was something old, something borrowed, a tradition. She picked it up. "It doesn't go with anything," she said, her voice shaking. "It's heavy and dark, and it clashes with the entire aesthetic." I tried to explain, to tell her what it meant to me, to our family, but she wasn't listening. "This is my wedding," she said, her voice rising, "not yours. Every single detail has been a fight with you. Can't you just let me have this one day? Can you just for once let it be about me and David?" And then she said the thing that has replayed in my head 1,000 times since: "You act like has still your little boy has not, has my husband now." She put the frame back in my hands. It felt cold and heavy. She turned her back on me and started rearranging the table, putting her own simpler frame back in its place. I stood there holding this piece of my past and felt utterly dismissed, erased. That night I cried to my husband. He told me to let it go. "It's their day," he said, echoing her words. "Everyone was telling me to let go." But letting go felt like admitting I didn't matter anymore. So when I walked into that reception hall, all that hurt was right there at the surface, simmering under a thin veneer of politeness. I smiled, I shook hands, I made small talk, but my eyes kept finding her. She was radiant, floating on a cloud of happiness that I felt completely excluded from. She didn't look at me once, not during the ceremony, not during the first dance. It was like I was a ghost at my own son's wedding. And then we were at the table, the speeches were over, the music was playing, there was a lull in the conversation. She was laughing with one of her friends, and she reached over and brushed a piece of lint off David's shoulder. It was such a simple wifely gesture, so possessive, and something in me just broke. All the slights, the arguments, the feeling of being pushed out, it coalesced into a sharp, bitter point. I leaned forward. I didn't even know what I was going to say until the words were out. "You shouldn't have come." The air went out of her. The laughter died on her lips. She turned to me, and her eyes weren't angry. They were just sad, deeply, profoundly sad. And she nodded, that small, terrible nod. It was an acknowledgement of everything. It meant, "You're right, this is broken, and it has been for a long time. And there's no fixing it here tonight." David looked from her to me, his face a mask of confusion and panic. But the moment was between her and me. It was our private, awful truth now, sitting in this silence, with the party Swirling around us, I look at her. I see the woman my son chose. I see her strength, her determination to build a life on her own terms. And I finally see my own reflection in this mess. I see a woman who was so afraid of losing her son that she fought a war to keep him, and in doing so guaranteed that she would lose him. The cowardice wasn't in the fighting, it was in my refusal to step back, to love him enough to let him go, to welcome her without conditions. This rupture, this painful public collision, it feels like an end, but maybe, just maybe, it's the only way a painful new beginning could ever have. Chance to start the first honest moment we've had in years. The decision wasn't made in a day, it was a slow build-up, like water dripping on a stone, until it finally wears a groove deep enough to notice. For years I had a name for it. I called it keeping the peace. It sounded noble, didn't it? Being the easygoing one, the one who didn't make waves. When she would make a comment about how I kept our apartment, I'd just smile and change the subject. When she would offer unsolicited advice about my career, I'd nod and say I'd think about it. When she would question our life choices, like where we vacationed or the friends we kept, I'd just let it slide. It was easier that way, or so I thought. But then we got engaged, and the stakes felt different. It wasn't just about me anymore, it was about us. The foundation we were trying to build for our marriage, and her behavior, the pattern of disrespect, it intensified. It was in the way she would talk over me when we were discussing wedding plans with the florist. It was in the suggestions that felt more like commands about the guest list, about the food, about the dress she thought I should wear instead of the one I had chosen. It was the subtle and sometimes not so subtle reminders that I was an outsider, that her way was the family way, and that my inclusion was conditional on my compliance. The turning point was a conversation about where we would spend holidays after we were married. She had it all mapped out, a rotating schedule that centered entirely on her family, with my family being an afterthought, a maybe if there's time kind of thing. And I remember looking at my partner. Your face was just resigned. You were so used to this, to managing her expectations, to smoothing things over. And in that moment I saw the future. I saw every holiday, every birthday, every major decision for the rest of our lives being filtered through her need for control. And I realized that my passive acceptance wasn't keeping the peace at all. It was just postponing a war. It was allowing a dynamic to take root that would eventually poison everything we were trying to build. The wedding day, with all its symbolism of a new beginning, felt like the only appropriate time to redefine the relationship. It was the line in the sand. If I didn't draw it then, on the day that was meant to celebrate our union, then when we talked about it for hours, it wasn't a decision I made alone that was crucial. We sat down and I laid it all out, the pattern, the feeling of being slowly erased, the fear for our future. And you understood, you saw it too. Having your full support was everything. It meant that when the moment came, I wouldn't be speaking as a rebellious daughter-in-law against a matriarch. I would be speaking as one half of a united front, defending the sanctity of our new family. We decided it had to be me who said it. It had to come from me directly, because the boundary was primarily between her and me. You would be there, your presence a silent testament to your support, but the words needed to be mine. The day itself was a blur of happiness and nerves, but underneath it all there was this steady low hum of resolve. I had practiced what I would say. It wasn't going to be an emotional outburst. That's what she would expect. That's what she could easily dismiss as wedding day. Jitters or brattiness, no, it had to be calm, deliberate. I chose the moment carefully after the ceremony, after the photos, when there was a quiet lull before the reception really got going. She found me, of course, to comment on how the seating chart had been arranged. It was the perfect opening. I remember taking a small breath and looking her directly in there. My voice was steady, lower than I expected it to be. I said, I need to say something to you, and it's important that you hear it. I acknowledged that this was a day of celebration, but that it also marked a new chapter, and for this new chapter to be healthy, some things needed to be clear. I told her that I loved you, and that I was committed to being a part of this family. But I said that the way she has spoken to me, the constant criticisms disguised as advice, the attempts to steer our decisions, it ends today. I said, from this day forward, I will not accept being spoken to with disrespect. Our home, our marriage, our choices are ours to make. Your opinions are welcome when asked for, but they are not commands. The look on her face was complex. There was shock, definitely. There was a flash of anger, but underneath it, I think there was a flicker of something else, recognition maybe. She was quiet for a long time. She looked at you, and you just gave a small, firm nod. And then she looked back at me. She didn't apologize. She just said, well, I see. And she walked away, and in that moment I felt a terrifying mix of guilt and liberation. The guilt was loud screaming that I had ruined the perfect day, that I was a horrible person for doing this on my wedding day. But the liberation was quieter, stronger. It was the feeling of a weight I had even known I was carrying being lifted off my shoulders. The fallout was immediate, not from her at first, but from others. An aunt pulled me aside later that evening, her face full of concern. She's very upset. She said, you know how she is this really the time? Then the text started a few days later. From other family members, they said I was being too harsh, that I should forgive and forget. That's what family does. They said I was creating drama, that I was the one rocking the boat. They labeled me the bad guy, the difficult one, and that was hard. It's isolating. You start to question yourself. Was I too cruel? Did I take it too far? But then I would come home to you, to our apartment, which felt more like our home than ever before, because it was a space we had protected. There was a new peace between us, a stability that hadn't been there before, because then spoken tension was gone. We weren't constantly waiting for the next comment, the next intrusion. The energy we had been using to manage her was now free, and that was the proof. I needed the boundary. Wasn't an act of cruelty, it was an act of preservation. It was firm, yes, but it was necessary for our mental health, for the health of our marriage. Withstanding the pressure to just make nice required a strength I didn't know I had. It meant accepting that some people would never understand, and that was okay. My priority wasn't their comfort, it was the integrity of our new life together. In the long term, the benefits have been profound. The relationship with your mother is different now. It's more distant, yes, the easy, casual familiarity is gone, but in its place is something that I believe is more honest. There's a new caution in how she interacts with me. She thinks before she speaks, and while that might sound cold, it's actually a form of respect that never existed before. The interactions we do have are more genuine because they exist within a framework we both understand. The constant undercurrent of resentment is gone. The relationship is clearer, defined by these new rules of engagement. The real benefit, the most important one, is the empowerment I feel. I learned that I have the right to protect my peace. I have the right to define what my relationships look like. Prioritizing my well-being and my marriage isn't selfish, it's essential. It's the foundation upon which everything else is built. If that foundation is shaky, nothing else can stand. So my advice, if you're facing a similar situation with a difficult family member, is this: first, you have to get clear on the pattern. It's never about one comment, one incident. It's the accumulation. Write it down if you have to see it for what it is. Second, if you're in a partnership, you must be a team. Have the difficult conversations with your partner first. Make sure you're on the same page there. Support is your anchor. Third, plan the conversation. Don't let it be a reactive explosion. Choose a time and a place where you can be calm and direct. Use I statements. Focus on the behavior, not the person. Explain the impact it has on you and clearly state the new boundary. Fourth, prepare for the fallout. People don't like change, especially those who benefit from the status quo. You will feel guilt. You will be pressured to back down. Stay strong. Remember why you're doing it. Finally, focus on the peace it will bring to your own life. Setting a boundary is a painful act, but it's a surgery. It hurts at first, but it's meant to remove something toxic so that you can heal and grow stronger. It is a painful but necessary lesson in teaching people how to treat you, and more importantly, in teaching yourself that you are worth protecting. Years later, I can still feel the chill of those words. They come back to me at the quietest times, when I'm watering the plants in the morning sun, or just sitting with a cup of tea watching the light change in the room. You shouldn't have come. It wasn't shouted. It was worse than that. It was a low, steady statement, a verdict delivered right there in the middle of all that wedding joy. The music was playing, people were dancing, and my daughter-in-law looked me straight in the eye and told me I was an intrusion, that I didn't belong at my own son's wedding for a long, long time. I held onto the hurt of that moment. I nurtured it. I'd turn it over in my mind before I fell asleep, examining every detail, feeling the sting fresh each time. I was the victim. I was the mother who had raised him, who had loved him unconditionally, who had only ever wanted what was best for him. And I was being publicly rejected by this young woman who, in my eyes, was stealing him away. I built a whole story around it, a story where I was the wronged heroine. That sentence, "You shouldn't have come," became the foundation of my grievance. It was the proof I needed that she was difficult, that she was trying to erase me from his life. It was a rupture, a clean break. The family photos from that day felt like a lie. There I was, smiling, but inside the family I thought I had was gone. The dynamic shifted that day, and for years it was frozen in that new painful shape. It took a long time for the ice around that memory to even begin to crack. It didn't happen overnight. It was a slow fall brought on by a lot of quiet solitude and eventually the help of a good therapist. I had to get to a point where I was tired of carrying the weight of my own resentment. It was exhausting, to always be the wounded party. In those sessions, I was gently forced to turn the memory around, to look at it from a different angle. Instead of just seeing my own hurt, I started to see the whole scene. I saw myself arriving at the wedding. I remembered the tightness in my chest as I walked, and my critical eyes scanning everything. The flowers weren't arranged the way I would have done them. The seating chart was a mess. I remembered making little comments sotovus to my sister. Oh, she chose that. I would have thought they'd have a more substantial meal. I thought I was being helpful, sharing my expertise, but I was a storm cloud hovering over her day. I was marking my territory, asserting my seniority. I was treating the wedding not as her celebration, but as a platform for my own opinions. And then I saw her not as the villainess ID painted her to be, but as a young woman probably terrified, trying to build a life with the man she loved. And here was his mother, a constant presence, a living reminder that she would never quite be enough. My helpful suggestions weren't help at all, they were a critique of her every choice. They were a message that I didn't trust her to be a good wife, to build a good home. That moment at the wedding, when she finally said the words, it wasn't a calculated act of malice, it was a desperate bid for autonomy. It was her drawing a line in the sand, saying, "This is my life, this is our day, and you are not the director here." It was the only way she knew how to claim a space for herself. She was building a fence, and I was the one constantly trying to climb over it. And my son, oh my poor son, I put him in an impossible position, the classic tug-of-war. I never truly considered the immense pressure he was under, caught between the woman who raised him and the woman he chose to build a future with. Every time I complained to him about her, every time I made him feel guilty for choosing her, I was forcing him to betray one for the other. I see that now. His choice to stand by her that day wasn't a rejection of me. It was the only choice he could make to save his marriage. It was an act of loyalty to his new family. And I forgive him for it. I truly do. I should have never put him in that position to begin with. The thaw between her and me was glacial. It didn't happen with a big dramatic scene. It was a series of small, cautious choices. It started with me. I had to make the first move. I had to swallow my pride, which was the hardest thing I've ever done. I stopped calling my son with complaints. I stopped offering unsolicited advice. I sent a birthday card to her, just a simple one with no strings attached. I didn't mention the wedding. I didn't try to force a conversation. I just acknowledged her birthday. For a long time there was silence. Then a thank you note arrived. It was brief, polite, but it was a response. That was the first thread. Then when my son would visit, I'd ask how she was doing. And I'd listen without judgment. I'd ask about her work, her interests, things that had nothing to do with him or with me. I was learning about her as a person separate from her role as my daughter-in-law. The boundaries were new and felt strange. I had to learn to wait for an invitation rather than assume I was welcome. I had to learn that their lives were theirs to share with me, not mine to demand access to. The pivotal moment came about 2 years after the wedding. They came over for a holiday. It was still a bit stiff. We were all trying so hard to be polite. It was exhausting. At one point she and I were alone in the kitchen cleaning up. The silence was heavy, and I just stopped. I put down the dish towel, and I turned to her. My heart was hammering in my chest. I said, "I am so sorry for the way I behaved at your wedding. I was wrong. I was intrusive and critical, and I made your day about me and my feelings. It was unforgivable, and I am truly sorry." I didn't make excuses. I didn't say I was just trying to help. I just stated the truth of my actions. She looked at me, and I saw the surprise in her eyes. And then she said something I'll never forget. She said, "Thank you for saying that. It was a hard day." And that was it. She didn't offer forgiveness right then. She didn't have to. The apology itself was the beginning. It was the first honest thing that had passed between us in years. It was the moment we stopped being adversaries and started being two people who loved the same man, trying to find a way to coexist. Our relationship now, it's not what you'd see in a movie. It's not a perfect, warm mother-daughter bond. It's something more real, and in its own way more valuable. It's based on respect and honesty. There's a space between us that We both acknowledge and honor. We see each other on holidays. We have them over for dinner. We talk, we laugh sometimes. There's an acceptance now. I accept that I am a part of their life, not the center of it. And she accepts that I am here, that I love my son, and that I am trying. It's a piece that we built brick by careful brick on the ruins of that awful day. The wisdom I've gained from all this, the hard-won lesson, is about the nature of love itself. I thought love was about holding on tight, about guiding, directing, making sure they didn't make the mistakes you made. I thought my experience gave me a right to a say. But that's not love, that's control disguised as love. Real love, especially for your adult children, is about letting go. It's about trusting the people you raise to make their own choices, even the choices you wouldn't make. It's about embracing their partners not as interlopers, but as the people they have chosen to share their journey with. Your job shifts from manager to consultant, and only when you're asked if I could offer any message to other parents, to other in-laws, it would be this: your children's lives are not your own. Your approval is not a prerequisite for their happiness. The greatest gift you can give them is your support, not your interference. Stand on the sidelines and cheer them on, even if you think they're running the wrong way. Be a safe harbor, not a lighthouse, constantly trying to steer their ship. It's a humbling thing to realize that the role you played for so long is over, but it's not an end, it's an evolution. So when I look back now, I see that moment at the wedding not as an end, but as a brutal, necessary beginning. You shouldn't have come was the truth I needed to hear. It was the shock to the system that forced me to grow up. Even in my later years, it taught me that love isn't about presence, it's about the quality of that presence. It's about being invited, not imposing. The pain of that day was the price of admission for the quieter, more genuine relationship I have now. And while I would never wish that pain on anyone, I am in a strange way grateful for the lesson. It was a difficult, necessary lesson in what love really means.